Beneath the corpse-cold towers of Prague, where prayers froze on the tongue and the dead were buried with knives in their hands, a stone was stolen, not a jewel, not a relic, a shard of refined warpstone, cut from nightmare and polished beneath the light of Morrslieb, the sick green moon that watches the world like an infected eye. They said the stone remembered visions. They said it had seen a road through the frozen north, a hidden path beneath the ice, a way for armies of ruin to enter Kislev before the warning fires could be lit. So when the shard vanished from the bloody altar of a Tsinkian cult, every monster in the north began to hunt. Cultists with feathered masks, marauders with antlers dipped in blood, Skaven killers from the black places beneath the world, and one Kislevite agent with nothing left to lose. But the thief was no common cutpurse. He was Scritch Black Needle of Clan, Eshin, assassin, liar, poisoner, murderer, and he had stolen more than a stone. He had stolen a future. Now, across the snowfields beyond Prague, under a moon that whispers secrets to the mad, the chase begins. And before dawn breaks over the black ice, men will be butchered, monsters will burn, and the fate of Kislev will rest in the claws of a creature who would sell the world for the right price. This is The Thief of Morrslieb Stone. Chapter 1. The Shard Beneath Prague. Prague wore winter like a corpse wore a shroud. Snow clung to its crooked roofs and broken gargoyles, blackened by soot and old blood before it could ever look clean. The city's towers leaned over the streets like judges preparing sentence. Iron weathercocks shrieked in the wind. Blue witch lanterns burned behind frosted glass. Somewhere beyond the walls, wolves howled across the frozen dark, and above it all hung Morrslieb, swollen and green, a diseased eye staring through rags of cloud. Beneath that baleful moon, under a chapel that had not heard honest prayer in 100 years, men in feathered masks gathered around a stone that should never have been cut. The chapel above was a ruin of split icons and snow-sunk graves. Its saints had been hammered faceless. Its altar had cracked down the middle as if struck by lightning. But below, in the old crypts where generations of Prague's dead slept in stacked alcoves, the cult had made a temple of its own. Candles guttered in niches filled with skulls. Brass mirrors hung from chains, each reflecting a slightly different chamber than the one before it. Maps of Kislev had been stretched across the walls with fishhooks and pins. Some were military charts. Some were peasant drawings. One had been inked on human skin. The rivers picked out in red thread. At the center of it all stood the astrolabe. It was a great brass thing of rings and rotating arms, tall as a gallows, etched with impossible angles that hurt the eye if stared at too long. Suspended in its heart was a shard of refined warpstone, no larger than a dagger blade, polished until it gleamed like green glass. It pulsed softly in time with the moon above, though no moonlight reached this deep. The Morrslieb stone. Magister Valek Sorn raised his hands. His fingers were too long. One had an extra joint. Another ended in a nail like a crow's beak. "Look," he whispered. The cultists leaned closer. Their masks were painted with eyes. 9 eyes on every brow. 9 eyes on every cheek. Feathers trembled as they breathed. Some wept. Some drooled. One man had clawed his own palms open and was smearing blood across a map of the northern passes. Within the shard, mist churned. Then came the vision. A canyon of black ice. An army moving without torches. banners crusted with frost, a road where no road had been. Prague, burning under a sky full of horns. Valek smiled, and his lips split too far at the corners. "There," he said, "there is the path, the door in winter, the wound beneath the snow. The future opens." One of the lesser cultists began to laugh. Another fell to his knees, whispering thanks to the changer of ways. A third vomited bright blue bile into his mask and kept praying through it. None of them noticed the first guard die. He had been standing at the stairwell entrance, wrapped in mail under a fur cloak, axe held across his chest. A black needle entered the soft place beneath his ear. His eyes went wide. He tried to turn, tried to shout, but his jaw locked with a wet click. His legs folded under him, and he slid down the wall slowly, leaving a dark streak on the stone. Something small and black dropped from the ceiling behind him. Scritch, Black Needle, landed without a sound. He was lean even for a Skaven, all corded muscle and knife-edge angles beneath a hooded cloak of midnight cloth. His fur was dark, slicked flat with grease and ash. Leather straps crossed his narrow chest, each holding blades, darts, hooks, vials, wire, and tiny curved knives meant for delicate work on screaming things. His eyes were wet black beads, bright with cruel amusement. He twitched his whiskers at the corpse. "Too slow," he murmured. Then he vanished into the shadows. The second guard saw only a flicker between the bone pillars. He raised his lantern. The flame caught the edge of a blade. Then Scritch was on him. The assassin's paw clamped over the man's mouth. A hooked knife punched into his belly and ripped upward. Mail rings snapped. Cloth split. The guard's muffled scream became a bubbling grunt as Scritch opened him from groin to ribs, hot guts slapping onto the frozen floor in steaming ropes. The man thrashed, heels hammering stone. Scritch twisted the knife, found the heart from below, and gave it a professional little flick. The guard died standing for half a breath before collapsing into his own spilled warmth. Now the cult noticed. A woman in a feathered mask turned and shrieked. "Intruder!" Scritch hurled a throwing star into her mouth. The steel punched through painted wood, teeth, tongue, and the back of her throat. Her scream became a spray. She staggered backward into a candle rack, setting her robes alight. For a moment she danced in the crypt, with fire crawling up her sleeves and blood pouring down her chin. Then everything became motion. Cultists drew knives. Guards roared. Mutated sentries dragged themselves from side chambers. Things that had once been men but had too many elbows, too much jaw, and eyes growing in the folds of their necks. Scritch bounded up a bone-stacked wall as a crossbow bolt snapped where his skull had been. He ran sideways along the ossuary shelves, claws clicking over old femurs, cloak streaming behind him. A guard swung a halberd and smashed half a dozen ancestral skulls into powder. Scritch leapt from the wall, landed on the man's shoulders, and drove 2 punch daggers into both his eyes. The guard bellowed. His hands flew to his face. Scritch kicked off him as he fell, tearing the daggers free with a thick sucking sound. A cultist lunged with a curved blade. Scritch ducked under it and sliced the tendons behind the man's knee. As the cultist dropped, the Skaven caught him by the mask and slammed his face into the edge of a stone sarcophagus. Once, twice. The mask cracked. The third blow drove splinters into the man's face, and his nose burst flat across his cheeks. Where is grace, elegance? Scritch hissed, offended by the poor quality of the attack. A hulking mutant crashed toward him, its shoulders scraping the ceiling, one arm ending in a mass of hooked bone. It swung. The blow shattered a pillar and filled the air with dust and teeth. Scritch rolled beneath the swing, came up behind it, and slashed both hamstrings. The creature dropped with a roar that shook frost from the ceiling. Before it could crawl around, Scritch sprang onto its back and stabbed a long stiletto into the base of its skull. The mutant convulsed. Its limbs slapped the floor hard enough to crack stone. Scritch rode it down like a duelist taking a bow. At the astrolabe, Valek Sorn did not run. He watched the assassin butcher his followers with bright, fascinated eyes. "Eshen," he said. Scritch turned, his muzzle wrinkled into a grin. "Clever man thing." Valek lifted one hand. The brass mirrors around the chamber spun toward Scritch at once. Reflections multiplied. Suddenly there were 12 assassins in the crypt, then 100, then none at all. The air filled with fluttering blue fire. Scritch moved before the spell struck. He flung a smoke globe at the floor. It burst into choking black vapor that stank of tar and grave mold. Fire screamed through it, turning smoke to sparks. A cultist stumbled blindly into Scritch's path. Scritch seized him by the collar and used him as a shield. The next bolt of blue flame hit the man square in the chest. He did not burn. He changed. His ribs opened like a cage door. Eyes blossomed across his lungs. His bones became glass and shattered under his own weight. He fell in glittering pieces, still trying to breathe. Scritch clicked his tongue. Magic, always messy. He darted, low, through the smoke. Valek spoke a word that made the candles burn upside down. Chains snapped from the walls like striking snakes. One caught Scritch around the waist, another around his left arm. Hooks bit into leather and flesh. The assassin snarled as he was yanked off his feet and slammed against a pillar. Cultists closed in. One thrust a spear. Scritch twisted enough that the blade scraped along his ribs instead of piercing his heart. Pain flashed white. He shrieked, not in fear but fury, and spat into the cultist's eyes. The spit smoked. The man screamed and dropped his spear, clawing at his face as venom ate into the soft tissue. Scritch wrenched his arm against the chain until the hook tore free from his flesh with a wet rip. He snatched a vial from his belt and smashed it against the links at his waist. The metal hissed, softened, and fell away in dripping black strands. He hit the floor on all fours and launched himself at the astrolabe. Valek's expression changed at last. Not fear, calculation. He reached for the Morrslieb stone. Scritch was faster. A blade flashed. Valek's reaching hand spun away from his wrist, fingers still twitching. Blood sprayed across the brass rings in a hot fan. The Magister stared at the stump, mildly surprised, as if some interesting theory had just been disproved. Then Scritch slammed into him. They crashed through a table of maps and ritual knives. Valek's remaining hand clawed at Scritch's throat, nails lengthening into black talons. Scritch bit 2 of the fingers off and spat them aside. Valek screamed a word of power into his face. For one heartbeat, Scritch saw himself die 9 different ways. Burned, flayed, crowned, drowned, worshipped, devoured, dissected, forgotten, laughing. He headbutted Valek in the mouth. The spell broke with the crunch of teeth. Scritch left the Magister choking in the wreckage and scrambled up the astrolabe. The brass rings spun around him, slicing the air. One caught his shoulder and tore a strip from his cloak. Another nearly took his tail. He hissed, climbed higher, and reached into the center. The Morrslieb stone was warm, wrongly warm. The moment his claws closed around it, the chamber vanished. He stood beneath Morrslieb on an endless field of snow. Prague burned in the distance, its towers bent like melted candles. Thousands marched through a canyon of black ice, but their footsteps made no sound. Above them flew banners he could not name. Beneath them, under the ice, something vast shifted and smiled. Then a horned shadow turned its head toward him. It knew him. Scritch snapped back into the crypt with a gasp. The astrolabe screamed. Brass rings spun out of control. Mirrors cracked one after another. The chamber shook, as if the dead beneath Prague had begun hammering on their coffin lids. Valek, bloody and broken, laughed from the floor. "You saw it," he wheezed. "The road, the future. You cannot steal a future, little rat." Scritch tucked the shard into a lead-lined case at his belt. "No," he said. "Watch, see." He threw 3 black pellets into the astrolabe's heart and ran. The explosion punched through the crypt like an angry god. Blue-green fire swallowed the cultists nearest the machine. Brass shrapnel scythed through bodies, cutting men in half, opening throats, punching fist-sized holes through ribs and masks. The ceiling split, bones rained from the walls. A flaming cultist staggered after Scritch, arms outstretched, before a falling stone crushed him from skull to pelvis. Scritch raced through the ossuary as the chapel above collapsed into the earth. Behind him, Valek screamed orders, curses, prophecies, perhaps all 3. Ahead, the stairwell filled with dust and moonlight. 2 guards blocked the way. Scritch did not slow. He slid between them on his back, blades out. Both men fell a step later, hamstrings severed, blood spraying across the stairs in pulsing arcs. Scritch sprang up behind them and kicked one into the other. They tumbled down into the smoke, shouting until the collapse swallowed them. The assassin burst from the ruined chapel into the night. Cold struck him like a hammer. Snow whipped across the graveyard. The city of Prague sprawled around him, crooked and cruel, and awake now with bells. Green moonlight bathed the roofs. Somewhere below, voices shouted. Dogs barked. A horn sounded from a watchtower. Scritch climbed, up a leaning mausoleum, across a sagging roof, along a frozen gutter, above an alley choked with refuse and old bones. He moved, despite the blood running down his side, despite the pain in his shoulder, despite the whisper now curling through his skull. The stone was speaking, not in words, not yet, but in promises, in roads, in knives, hidden behind tomorrow's back. Scritch crouched atop a gargoyle and looked out across Prague. Far below, figures spilled from alleys around the chapel. Cult survivors, city watch, men in furs, things that were not men. On another roof, a hunched shape with Skaven eyes watched him and vanished. The assassin's whiskers twitched. Every power in the north would want what he carried. Good. A chase was only a murder stretched thin. Scritch Blackneedle grinned beneath Morrslieb's sick green light, clutched the stolen future at his belt, and fled into the frozen dark. Chapter 2. Knives in the Snow. Scritch. Blackneedle stole the sled from a dying man. The fellow had been a fur trader once, judging by the ermine pelts lashed beneath the seat and the fat purse hidden in his boot. By the time Scritch found him, he was little more than a red ruin propped against a milestone. beard frozen solid, one hand pressed over a belly wound that had already steamed itself cold. His two horses stamped and screamed in the road, eyes rolling white at the scent of blood. The man saw the Skaven emerge from the snow and tried to reach for a pistol. Scritch was beside him before his fingers touched the grip. "Mine, mine," the assassin hissed. The trader's mouth opened, maybe to plead, maybe to curse. Scritch placed one claw against his lips and slid a needle through the man's left eye. The trader stiffened, boots drumming once against the packed snow, then sagged into silence. Scritch wiped the needle on the man's fur collar, took the pistol, took the purse, took a strip of dried horse meat from the sled, then cut the corpse loose and kicked it into a ditch. Waste was for fools. He drove the horses hard north, out of Prague. The city fell behind him, its broken towers swallowed by storm cloud and chimney smoke. Dawn came grey and mean over the plains, not so much light as a thinning of the dark. The world beyond Prague was a white waste of crooked birchwoods, frozen marsh, lonely shrines, and wind-scraped burial mounds. Snow blew in long hissing sheets over the road. Old bones jutted from drifts where wolves had dug through shallow graves. Scritch crouched low in the sled, cloak wrapped tight, the lead-lined case strapped beneath his ribs. Inside it, the Morrslieb stone pulsed with a warmth he hated. It whispered whenever the wind dropped, not words, not properly, more like the memory of words. Directions without language, images pressed against the back of his eyes. A canyon, black ice, banners under moonlight, a road that opened only when watched. Scritch bared his teeth, quiet still, moon rock. The stone did not obey. By noon, the first riders found him. They came out of the blowing snow as smudges of iron and fur. 3 men on shaggy steppe horses, red antlers tied to their helms, axes across their saddles. Their faces were painted with old blood. One carried a banner made from flayed skin, frozen stiff and clacking in the wind. "Rat!" one roared. Scritch glanced back and spat. The horses pulling the sled screamed as the marauders gained. Hooves thundered on the hard road. One rider loosed a javelin. It struck the sled's rear board with a heavy chunk, splitting the wood beside Scritch's tail. "Rude, rude!" Scritch snapped. He cut the left trace. One horse broke free and veered screaming into the drifts. The sled slewed violently sideways. The nearest marauder laughed and leaned in, axe raised for a killing blow. Scritch threw the dead trader's pistol, not fired, thrown. It struck the marauder in the face, breaking his nose and knocking him back in the saddle. He swore, blinded by blood. Before he recovered, Scritch flung a hooked chain. It wrapped around the man's throat, the barbs biting deep. Scritch braced his feet against the sled and yanked. The rider came off the horse with a wet, choking sound. His body hit the road and bounced once. The chain went taut. Scritch dragged him behind the sled, the man's limbs flailing, heels tearing bloody grooves through the snow. His antlered helm snagged on a buried stone. His neck snapped with a crack loud enough to carry over the wind. Scritch released the chain and laughed. The second marauder charged alongside. He swung an axe two-handed. The blade shaved fur from Scritch's shoulder and buried itself in the sled rail. Scritch sprang onto the haft, ran up it, and kicked both claws into the man's chest. They went down together over the side. The world became hooves, snow, iron, and breath. The marauder was huge, stinking of sweat, old meat, and sour beer. He roared and punched Scritch hard enough to split the assassin's lip. Scritch tasted blood and fury. The man's hand closed around his throat and squeezed. Scritch felt claws of pressure dig behind his eyes. He drove a knife into the marauder's armpit. The blade slid between rings of mail and found something soft. The man grunted. Scritch twisted. Hot blood spilled over his paw, steaming in the cold. The grip on his throat loosened. Scritch stabbed again, and again, and again. He worked the knife upward, under the ribs, like a butcher prying meat from bone, until the marauder's roar became a gurgle. The third rider was almost on him. Scritch ripped the dying man's axe free and hurled it clumsily. He had no strength for accuracy, but luck, panic, or the stone's malice guided it. The axe struck the third horse in the foreleg. Bone snapped. The animal crashed forward, screaming, and threw its rider headfirst into the road. Scritch limped to him through the snow. The marauder tried to rise. His neck had broken badly, leaving his head lolling at an absurd angle, but still he clawed for his knife. Scritch stamped on his wrist until the bones cracked. Then he drove his blade through the man's open mouth and pinned his skull to the frozen ground. For a moment there was only wind. Then an arrow whispered past Scritch's ear. He flung himself flat. A second arrow struck the dead marauder's back. A third nicked Scritch's hood. He rolled under the half-broken sled as more arrows hissed through the storm. From the tree line came men in pale furs, faces wrapped in scarves, bows in gloved hands. Kislevite scouts. 5 of them. No, 6. One moved like command. A woman stepped from between the birches with a pistol in one hand and a saber in the other. Her fur hat was pulled low. Frost clung to her lashes. Her gaze moved over the dead marauders, the ruined sled, then fixed on Scritch with the cold disgust men reserved for rats in grain stores. "Claneshin," she said. Scritch's ears twitched. "Human knows too much. I know enough to shoot you. Then shoot." She did not. That interested him. The scouts spread out. Scritch could smell their nerves beneath the horse sweat and leather. He could also smell the iron discipline holding them in place. The woman took a step closer. "My name is Nadia Volkov. You stole something from a cult in Prague. I was hunting them before you fouled my city with your little claws." "Your city?" Scritch sneered. "Prague belongs to ghosts, snow, and things under beds. It belongs to those who bleed for it, then many owners." One of the scouts muttered a curse and drew his bowstring tighter. Nadia did not blink. "The stone, hand it over." Scritch felt the case pulse against his side. "No, then we cut it from you." Behind her, one of the birch trees moved. Not a tree. A Skaven in piecemeal armor rose from beneath a white cloak, crossbow already leveled. The bolt struck the scout beside Nadia in the throat. It punched through scarf and flesh, burying itself to the fletching. The man dropped his bow and clutched at the shaft, blood spraying between his fingers in bright rhythmic spurts. Then the snow erupted. Skaven burst from shallow tunnels and drift holes, lean shapes with rusted blades, hooked spears and yellow teeth. At their head came Krieg Rustfang, broad-shouldered and scarred, one eye milk-white, his snout split by an old wound that showed black gums beneath. Unlike Scritch, there was nothing elegant about him. He was a cleaver, where Scritch was a razor. "Black Needle," Krieg screeched. Give treasure and die quick," Screech groaned. "Always hated you." The forest became slaughter. Kislevites fired at close range. A Skaven's head snapped back as a lead bore opened his skull, scattering grey matter across white bark. Another leapt onto a scout and drove a spear through his stomach. The man screamed and grabbed the shaft, trying to hold his insides in while the Skaven bit his cheek open. Nadia shot the attacker through the side of the head. Bone and teeth burst outward. She kicked the corpse away and shouted for a fighting circle. Scritch used the confusion to run, or tried. Creek came at him with a serrated cleaver in each paw, shrieking with joy. Scritch parried the first blow and felt it jar up his arm. The second opened a line across his thigh. Pain burned hot. Slow now, Creek spat. Old knife rat tired? Scritch flicked a blade at his face. Creek ducked. The blade took off half his ear. He laughed and smashed a knee into Scritch's ribs. Scritch hit the snow hard. Creek stamped down. Scritch rolled, and the cleaver buried itself in the frozen ground where his skull had been. Scritch slashed Creek's ankle. Creek kicked him in the jaw. Sparks exploded behind Scritch's eyes. Nadia's saber flashed between them. She cut at Creek's neck. The big Skaven jerked back, but the blade still opened his cheek from whisker to jaw. He hissed and spat black blood. "Mine kill!" Creek snarled. "Not today," Nadia said, and fired a second pistol into his chest. The shot threw Creek backward, but his armor caught most of it. He vanished into the melee, shrieking orders. Scritch stared at Nadia. "Why help? Because I need you alive until I get answers. That is stupid reason. It is the only reason you have." A horn sounded from the west, deep, brutal. Human lungs and animal bone. The surviving marauders came through the trees like an avalanche. More red antler reavers, at least a dozen, their shaman staggering among them in a cloak of crow wings and frozen scalps. Blue fire crawled over the shaman's staff. His eyes were milked over, but he pointed straight at Scritch. "Moonbone!" he howled. "The rat carries the moonbone." The Kislevites cursed. The Skaven squealed. Scritch made a small, unhappy sound. Then the Tsientians arrived. Feathered masks appeared between the trees. Crossbow bolts tipped with blue glass cut through the blizzard. One struck a marauder in the spine. He arched backward, screaming as feathers burst from his mouth and eye sockets. Another hit a Skaven, who swelled like a bladder and burst in a wet splash of fur, bones, and shimmering vapor. From somewhere unseen, Valeksorn's voice drifted over the snow, ragged and amused. "Little thief, did you think distance mattered to destiny?" Scritch's fur bristled. He had cut off that man's hand. He had broken his teeth. He had left him under a collapsing chapel. Some men were too rude to die properly. The fight dissolved into chaos. Marauders hacked Skaven apart with axes. Skaven swarmed them in packs, stabbing groins, ankles, bellies. Cultists fired from cover and chanted until the snowflakes turned briefly into moths. Kislevites tried to withdraw, in order, dragging their wounded, but order meant little once the trees themselves seemed to lean closer to watch the killing. Nadia grabbed Scritch by the back of his cloak and hauled him behind a fallen log as a wave of blue flame washed overhead. Bark blackened. Snow hissed into steam. "You know where it points," she said. Scritch wiped blood from his muzzle. "Maybe. You saw the route. Maybe." She pressed her saber against his throat. "Listen, rat. You can run from me, them, and whatever filth crawled after you from under the city. but you cannot outrun all of us forever. Help me find what the stone saw, and I help you live long enough to betray me." Scritch narrowed his eyes. That was insultingly accurate. Behind them, a marauder lifted a Kislevite scout overhead and broke the man across his knee with a crunch of spine and ribs. To the left, Creek chewed through a cultist's throat. Above the trees, something winged moved inside the cloud bank, circling. The stone pulsed again. This time the vision struck both Scritch and Nadia. The forest vanished. They stood before a canyon of black ice, its mouth opening in the snowfield like a wound. An army moved below the surface of the world, not marching through Kislev's borders, but under them, under roads, under forts, under time itself. The route twisted through frozen ravines that were not there by daylight. It showed a path beneath reality, a road that could carry war into the heart of the land before the first warning fire was lit. Then something in the canyon looked up. Scritch gasped. Nadia staggered, face hard with horror. The vision broke. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Scritch smiled thinly. "Temporary bargain?" Nadia lowered the saber a finger's width. "Temporary. Good, good." He flung a smoke bomb into her face. She cursed and swung blindly. Scritch slipped aside, not fleeing this time but darting toward the broken sled. He grabbed a pouch of blasting powder from beneath the seat, ripped it open with his teeth, and scattered the contents across the snow between the fighting packs. Then he hurled a sparking pellet into the powder trail. The explosion tore the clearing apart. Men and Skaven vanished in a burst of dirty fire. A marauder's arm spun through the air, still gripping an axe. A cultist staggered out of the smoke, with his chest peeled open, ribs exposed like the fingers of a white hand. 2 trees cracked and fell, crushing, screaming shapes beneath them. Scritch seized one of the remaining horses. Nadia, half-blinded and furious, seized the other. They rode north out of the burning forest with arrows, bolts, curses, and screams chasing them through the storm. Behind them, Valek's voice rose in a shriek of laughter. Creek howled Scritch's name. The marauder shaman beat his staff against the frozen earth. And from above the clouds came a sound like glass being scraped across bone. Scritch looked up. A winged thing descended through the blizzard, its body all feathers, flame, claws, and impossible angles. It had too many mouths, and every one of them was smiling. It screamed a name into the storm. Not Scritch Blackneedle. Another name. His first name. His secret name. The one whispered over him in the breeding dark beneath the world, before blades and titles and lies. A name no living thing should know. For the first time since stealing the Morrslieb stone, Scritch Blackneedle felt something colder than winter crawl beneath his fur. He kicked his horse harder, and beside him Nadia Volkov rode with death at her back and the future burning somewhere ahead. Chapter 3. The Canyon That Wasn't There. By day, there was nothing, only snow. A white waste rolled northward beneath a flat iron sky, broken by thorny scrub, wind-carved drifts, and the black fingers of dead trees clawing up from the permafrost. No road marked the land, no ravine split it, no mountain rose nearby to suggest a hidden pass. It was a place that maps forgot, because there was nothing worth remembering. Nadia Volkov stood beside her exhausted horse and stared across the empty plain. This is where the vision led. Scritch Blackneedle crouched in the snow, nose twitching, one paw pressed to the lead-lined case beneath his cloak. His wounds had stiffened in the cold. Blood had dried in dark crusts along his ribs and thigh. One ear was torn. His whiskers were clotted with frost. Still, his black eyes glittered with vicious certainty. "Here, here," he said. "There is nothing here. Daylight lies." Nadia looked up. The sun was already sinking, bleeding red behind the clouds. To the east, Morrslieb waited as a pale green smear in the dimming sky, not yet bright, not yet powerful, but present all the same. The chaos moon seemed closer than it had in Prague. Her remaining scouts had died before noon. One had been dragged beneath the snow by something with too many fingers. Another had taken a cultist's glass bolt through the belly and spent an hour screaming as feathers pushed through his skin from the inside. The last, old Sava with the scarred cheek and steady hands, had held a frozen ford against 3 Skaven long enough for Nadia and Skritch to cross. When she last saw him, he was on his knees, laughing through bloody teeth while he rammed a broken saber up beneath a ratman's jaw. Now there were only 2 riders at the edge of nowhere, one woman of Kislev, one Skaven assassin, and between them, a stone that whispered of invasion. The wind fell. The silence that followed was worse. Skritch's ears flattened. Nadia felt it too, pressure, like a storm building behind her eyes. The horses began to whimper. Snowflakes hung in the air instead of falling. Then Morrslieb rose. Green light spread across the plain. The snowfield split open without a sound. A black line appeared in the white, thin at first, as a knife cut. Then it widened. Snow poured downward into darkness. Ice cracked in long, jagged seams. The ground folded away from itself, revealing walls of black ice descending into a canyon that had not existed a breath before. Nadia made the sign of Ursun with a shaking hand. Skritch grinned, though his claws dug into the snow. The canyon breathed. Cold air rolled up from below, carrying smells that should not have been trapped in ice. Old smoke, wet fur, rusted armor, rotting meat, and the faint copper stink of fresh blood. Along the canyon walls, faces pressed outward from within the black ice. Human faces, Skaven faces, beast faces. Some were ancient, their features blurred by frost. Others looked newly frozen, eyes wide, mouths open as though they had been screaming for only moments. One of them turned its eyes toward Nadia. She drew her pistol. Skritch clicked his teeth. "Shoot ice. Yes, yes. Very brave. Keep walking." They descended by a ledge no wider than a coffin lid. The horses refused the slope and were left above, stamping and panicked in the green moonlight. Below, the canyon twisted through the frozen earth in impossible curves. Sometimes the path turned back on itself, yet continued forward. Sometimes Nadia saw their own footprints ahead of them, half filled with snow. The Morrslieb stone pulsed inside its case. With each pulse, images crawled over the ice. A watchtower burning, a child buried beneath a collapsed roof, armies marching through fog, Prague's gates opening from the inside. Nadia clenched her jaw until her teeth hurt. "It wants us afraid." Skritch glanced at her. "No, it wants us to choose." They found the first bodies at the canyon's bend. A dozen chaos marauders lay frozen into the ice, hacked apart days, years, or centuries ago. Their red antler helms jutted from the walls. Their axes were still raised. Their wounds had not bled outward, but upward, crimson streams frozen in the air like ribbons of glass. One corpse had been split from shoulder to groin. Its ribs were spread wide, its organs gone, its face fixed in ecstatic horror. Nadia knelt beside tracks in the frost. Fresh. Scritch sniffed. Rustfang. The ambush came from above. Skaven dropped from cracks in the ice, shrieking, rusted blades clutched in both paws. Nadia fired upward and blew the first one apart in mid-leap. It struck the ledge in 2 pieces, its spine trailing like a snapped rope. Scritch slipped beneath the second and opened its belly with both knives. Entrails spilled steaming into the snow, and the creature screamed as it tried to stuff them back in with trembling claws. 3 more came at Nadia. She met them with saber and hatred. The first thrust a spear at her throat. She beat it aside, stepped in, and cut through its snout. The blade sheared nose, teeth, and tongue in a wet diagonal line. The Skaven fell back gagging, paws clamped to the ruin of its face. Nadia kicked it over the ledge and heard it hit the wall twice before vanishing into the dark. The second leapt onto her back. Its claws punched through her cloak and bit into her shoulders. Hot pain tore down her spine. She slammed herself backward into the ice wall. Once, twice. The Skaven squealed in her ear and bit at her cheek. She felt teeth scrape skin. On the third impact, its ribs cracked. She seized its arm, hauled it over her shoulder, and drove her saber down through its chest. The point burst from its back and pinned it writhing to the ledge. The third got close enough to open her thigh. The knife slid across muscle, deep and hot. Nadia grunted, nearly fell, then smashed the pommel of her saber into the creature's skull. Bone dented. She hit it again. The skull gave with a thick crunch, one eye bulging loose. Again. The head came apart under her hand, spraying dark blood across her sleeve. Scritch was laughing. He danced through his kin like a sliver of shadow. A blade in the eye. A wire around the throat. A kick to the knee followed by a dagger under the jaw. He killed without pause, without mercy, without even the dignity of anger. One Skaven lunged at him with a cleaver. Scritch caught the wrist, twisted until the bones snapped, then rammed the creature's own blade into its mouth and up through the roof of its skull. "Poor, poor work," he hissed. "No art." Then Creek Rustfang stepped from the storm of falling snow, and art became brute force. The larger Skaven hit Scritch like a thrown anvil. They smashed into the ice wall together. Creek's claws closed around Scritch's throat and lifted him clear off the ground. "Little knife thief," Creek snarled. "Clan wants stone. I bring. I eat your eyes first." Scritch drove both knees into Creek's belly. Creek barely moved. He slammed Scritch down onto the ledge hard enough to crack ice. Scritch's breath burst from him. Creek raised a cleaver. Nadia fired her last pistol. The ball struck Creek's shoulder and spun him halfway around. Scritch rolled as the cleaver chopped down, missing his skull by a finger's breadth and biting deep into the ledge. Scritch came up with a needle between his claws and stabbed it into Creek's wounded shoulder. Creek howled. His arm seized. Black veins spread beneath his fur. "Poison," Scritch spat. "Made special for you." Creek grinned through the pain. "Not enough." He ripped the cleaver free and charged again. Before he reached them, the canyon shook. A blue fireball struck the ledge between the combatants and blew the ice outward. Nadia was thrown backward. Scritch vanished in smoke. Creek tumbled, caught the edge with one claw, and hung snarling over the drop. From the far side of the canyon came Valak Sorn. He rode no horse. He walked on air. His robes streamed around him in tatters. His severed hand had been replaced by a long cluster of jointed brass fingers that moved like spider legs. His broken mouth had been stitched with silver wire, but the smile behind it was wide and wet. Around him came the survivors of the Ninefold Eye, masked cultists carrying lanterns filled with writhing blue flame. "You have led us beautifully," Valak called. "All of you. Rat, woman, butcher, fool. Pieces upon the board." Nadia staggered upright, blood running warmly down her leg. Screech emerged beside a broken pillar of ice, smoke curling from his cloak. Creek hauled himself up, trembling with poison and rage. The canyon opened wider beneath them. At its heart stood an ancient altar of black ice and tarnished brass. Warning stones circled it, carved with symbols hacked deep by hands long dead. Some were Kislevite, some were dwarf runes, some were not meant for sane eyes. The Morrslieb stone tore itself free from Scritch's case. It hovered above the altar, blazing green. Every face in the ice began to scream. The sound drove men to their knees. Cultists clutched their masks, Skaven clawed at their ears, until blood ran between their fingers. Nadia felt the scream inside her bones, inside old scars, inside memories she had buried deeper than winter. The stone showed them what they wanted. Scritch saw himself draped in black silk beneath the Under-Empire, 1,000 assassins bowing, rivals dead in heaps, his name scratched into fear itself. Creek saw Scritch gutted at his feet, and the stone delivered to masters who would finally speak his name with respect. Valak saw wings splitting from his back, cities bending beneath him, futures blooming like flowers of fire. Nadia saw Prague saved. She saw the northern passes sealed, saw signal fires lit in time, saw the hidden road broken, saw children alive who would otherwise burn. Then she saw the price. Scritch dead, her scouts dead, villages abandoned to freeze, prisoners tortured for knowledge, innocents sacrificed to buy days, then hours, then minutes. The stone did not lie. That was its cruelty. Valak raised his brass hand. "Behold, it does not merely show the road, it instructs the age how to build it. Study the vision, follow the wound, and the invasion becomes inevitable." Nadia understood then. The stone was not a warning, it was bait, a future that wanted worshippers. "Destroy it," she said. Scritch stared at the blazing shard. For once, he did not answer. Creek charged for it first. Valak flicked his fingers, and gravity twisted. Creek shot sideways into the wall, striking so hard his armor buckled. Cultists surged forward. Skaven met them. Marauders poured from an upper passage with a roar. Yorok, Red Antler, at their head, his staff raised beneath Morrslieb's glare. The canyon became a pit of murder. Axes split masks and skulls. Blue fire turned men inside out. Skaven dragged marauders down in squealing packs, stabbing until furs became soaked black. Nadia carved her way toward the altar, each step agony, her wounded leg threatening to fold. A cultist lunged at her with a glass dagger. She caught his wrist, broke it across her knee, and drove the dagger into his own throat. Bright blood fountained over her hands. Scritch appeared atop the altar. He reached for the stone. The shard cracked. A beam of green light shot upward through the canyon, into the night sky, and spread into a vast map of burning lines, ravines, passages, hidden valleys, a route through the north, shining above the tundra for every monster, warlord, prophet, and spy to see. For miles around, the frozen world glowed sickly green. Valak laughed until his stitches split. Nadia looked up at the map and felt despair settle in her like a blade. Scritch Blackneedle stood beneath the burning future, the cracked stone reflected in his black eyes, and somewhere far above the canyon, answering horns began to sound. Chapter 4. Under the light of Morrslieb. The map burned across the sky. It hung above the black ice canyon like a wound cut into the night, all green fire and jagged lines, every hidden ravine and frozen passage drawn in Morrslieb's sickly light. It showed the way through the north. It showed the secret throat of Kislev laid bare to every beast, warlord, witch, and crawling thing with eyes enough to see it. Nadia Volkov stood beneath it with blood running down her leg and freezing inside her boot. For one terrible moment, no one fought. Cultists stared upward, their feathered masks glowing emerald. Skaven hunched in the snow, whiskers twitching, greedy eyes reflecting the route. Chaos marauders lowered their axes and roared in wonder, as if their gods had slit open the heavens just for them. Then Valak Sorn screamed with joy. "Witness it!" he cried, his silver-stitched mouth tearing wider with every word. The road beneath the world, the invasion before the warning, the future made flesh. His brass fingers twisted in the air, and the cracked Morrslieb stone spun above the altar, shedding sparks that hissed when they struck ice. The canyon answered him. Its walls groaned. Faces trapped in the black ice opened their mouths and shrieked without lungs. The sound drove nails through Nadia's skull. Scritch Blackneedle stood on the altar beneath the floating shard, cloak snapping in the moonlit wind. He looked small against the blazing map, a hunched black knife rat with blood on his muzzle and murder in his eyes. Yet for a heartbeat, everyone looked at him. Creek Rustfang was the first to move. The hulking Skaven flung himself up the altar steps with a howl, poison-black veins crawling beneath his fur. One arm hung half useless from Scritch's needle, but the other carried a cleaver large enough to split a man from crown to crotch. "Mine!" Creek shrieked. "Stone mine! Glory mine! Your throat mine!" Screech sprang aside as the cleaver smashed down. The blade bit into the altar, splitting black ice and sending green-lit shards across the snow. Screech landed on Creek's back, hooked both feet beneath the larger Skaven's armor straps, and drove a stiletto toward his neck. Creek bucked like a mad bull. The blade missed the spine and carved a red trench behind his ear. Creek slammed himself backward into a pillar of ice. Scritch was crushed between fur, armor, and frozen stone. His ribs cracked. Breath burst from him in a sharp squeal. Creek reached over his shoulder, seized Scritch by the hood, and hurled him down the steps. Scritch struck a cultist on the way down. They went sprawling together. The cultist tried to stab him with a glass knife. Scritch caught the man's wrist in both paws and bit deep into his thumb, tearing it loose at the joint. The cultist screamed. Scritch spat the thumb into his mask and punched a blade up beneath his jaw. The point burst through the top of the man's skull, lifting the mask crookedly as blood poured through its painted eyes. Around them, the canyon exploded into war. The Red Antler Reavers charged from the upper ledges, boots hammering on ice, axes raised, throats raw with worship and hunger. Yorick Red Antler came behind them, his crow-wing cloak flapping in the gale, his staff crowned with a skull that burned blue from within. The Skaven met the charge in a filthy wave. They came from cracks, tunnels, and shadowed shelves in the canyon wall, stabbing upward into bellies and groins. A marauder swung his axe and took a ratman's head clean off, the skull bouncing across the ice with the jaw still snapping. Another Skaven leapt onto the man's chest and drove a hooked dagger into his eye. The marauder roared, grabbed the creature by the spine, and ripped it off him so violently that its claws tore strips from his own face. He dashed it against the canyon wall until its skull burst like rotten fruit. Blue fire washed over them both. The ninefold eye had formed a ring around Valek. They chanted through masks wet with breath and blood. Their hands moved in patterns that made Nadia's stomach turn. Wherever their spells struck, flesh forgot its shape. One marauder's arm became a nest of pink serpents that bit into his own throat. A Skaven's ribs opened like fingers and folded backward, exposing a heart that had become a blinking eye. A cultist mispronounced a word and collapsed inward, bones folding with wet cracks until he was no larger than a child. Nadia forced herself toward the altar. Her thigh screamed with every step. Her shoulders burned where Skaven claws had torn through cloak and skin. Her pistol was empty. Her saber was notched, slick, and heavy in her hand. She had no prayer left, only rage. A marauder blocked her path, bare-chested despite the cold, his skin scored with old scars and fresh runes cut deep enough to show yellow fat beneath. He grinned when he saw her. "Little southling," Nadia answered by slashing at his face. He caught the blade on an iron bracer and drove his fist into her stomach. The blow folded her. Air vanished from her lungs. He backhanded her across the cheek, and stars burst behind her eyes. She hit the ice on one knee. The marauder raised his axe. Nadia threw herself forward, not away. The axe blade chopped down behind her, shaving hair from the back of her head and biting into the ice. She drove her saber into his inner thigh with both hands. The point punched through muscle and found the great artery. Hot blood gushed over her gloves, steaming in the cold. The marauder bellowed and tried to wrench free. Nadia twisted the blade. His leg collapsed. He dropped to one knee, still clawing for her throat. She ripped the saber free and cut across his neck. Not cleanly. The blade hacked through beard, flesh, and gristle, lodging halfway. He gurgled, eyes bulging. Nadia planted a boot on his chest and tore the weapon loose in a red spray. He fell backward, hands clamped uselessly to the open ruin of his throat. Nadia staggered on. Above the altar, the map in the sky sharpened. More detail burned into being. Names appeared in curling script that hurt to read. Watchtowers, rivers, fortified roads, hidden valleys, places where Kislevite blood would freeze before it hit the ground. Valek raised both arms, one flesh, one brass. "Open," he commanded. "Open, and let tomorrow march." The canyon split wider. Far below, beneath the translucent ice, something moved. Ranks of phantom warriors appeared underfoot, marching in silence through depths that were not depths. Their armor was rimed with frost. Their banners dragged behind them without wind. They were not yet real, but they were becoming more real with every pulse of the stone. Nadia saw them and understood. The invasion was not being revealed. It was being invited. Scritch understood too. He had climbed halfway back up the altar, one eye swollen, lips peeled from his teeth in pain. The Morrslieb stone hovered above him, cracked now down its center, green light leaking from the wound like poison from a boil. "Black Needle!" Nadia shouted. He glanced at her. For one breath, she thought he might help. Then he sprang, snatched the stone from the air, and ran. Nadia's heart went cold. You filthy little... Scritch dashed past Creek, under the arc of a cleaver, across the altar's spinning brass machinery, and toward a narrow ledge leading deeper into the canyon. The map above flickered but did not vanish. Instead, its light followed him, stretching from sky to stone like a chain. Creek howled and charged after him. Valek laughed, delighted. Yes, run, carry it. Carry the future where it must go. Nadia pursued because there was nothing else left. The ledge shook beneath them. Behind her, the battle dissolved into slaughter. Yoruk Red Antler smashed his staff into the ground, and a cone of blue flame blasted through Skaven and cultists alike. Burning bodies tumbled from the ledges, striking the canyon walls in sprays of sparks and blood. A dying marauder crawled with both legs missing, dragging red ropes behind him, laughing as he bit the ankle of a cultist who strayed too near. Scritch reached the heart of the ritual engine. It was built into the canyon wall. Brass rings, frozen chains, rune-cut mirrors, and hooked pylons sunk deep into black ice. The stone had been meant to rest there, to be focused there, to turn vision into certainty. Scritch placed it into the central socket. Nadia nearly threw her saber at his back. Then she saw what else he held. Warpstone charges, tiny black pellets, acid vials, assassin's tools, meant for murder, now tucked between the machine's delicate joints. Scritch looked over his shoulder and grinned through blood. Best way to steal future, he hissed, is make sure no one else has it. Creek slammed into him before he could light the fuse. The two Skaven crashed across the machinery, tearing chains loose. Creek got both paws around Scritch's throat and squeezed until Scritch's eyes bulged. Scritch clawed at him, kicking, stabbing, but Creek's rage made him strong beyond pain. I eat your name, Creek snarled. I eat your shadow. Nadia reached them as Valek descended from above, walking down the air as if it were a staircase. His brass hands sparked. His eyes were full of green fire. Do not break it, Valek said softly. Do you know how many futures died to make this one? Nadia spat blood at his feet. Not enough. He struck her with magic. Pain ripped through her body. Every scar reopened. Every old wound screamed as if made fresh. She saw herself as a child in Prague, starving beside a cold hearth. She saw her father hanged. She saw the city burning. She saw herself kneeling before Valek, thanking him for the mercy of knowing defeat before it came. She took one step forward, then another. Her skin split along her cheek. Blood ran into her mouth. She lifted her saber with both hands. Valek frowned. Nadia drove the blade into his belly. He gasped, more offended than hurt. His brass fingers clamped around her face, talons digging into her jaw. She pushed harder. The saber grated against bone. Valek's stitched mouth opened, and blue flame gathered behind his teeth. Nadia twisted the blade sideways. His guts spilled out over the guard of the saber in slick loops, gray and red and steaming. The flame in his mouth guttered into a wet cough. Still he smiled. The future. Nadia headbutted him. His silver stitches snapped. His mouth tore open. She wrenched the saber up through him, splitting his chest to the sternum. Valek staggered backward, holding himself together with his brass hand, laughing and sobbing at once. The cracked stone flared. Every future Valak had craved poured into him. Wings burst half-formed from his back, then rotted. Horns grew from his skull and curled inward through his eyes. His skin became parchment covered in frantic writing. His bones turned into birds and tried to escape through his flesh. He screamed as destiny devoured him, voice rising until the canyon walls cracked. Then he folded into a knot of feathers, wire, blood, and broken prophecy, and fell apart. Creek looked up just long enough. Scritch drove an acid vial into his open mouth and smashed it with his fist. Creek's scream became a bubbling howl. Smoke poured from his jaws. His tongue blackened, split, and sloughed away. He reeled backward, clawing at his face. Scritch kicked him behind the knee, then shoved with all the strength left in his wiry body. Creek fell into the open crack beneath the ritual engine. He struck the side once, bounced, caught a chain with one hand, and hung there, face melting, eyes wide with hatred. "Black Needle," he gurgled. Scritch leaned over him. "Rust Fang." Then he cut the chain. Creek dropped into the green-lit abyss, screaming until the depths swallowed him. The fuse caught. Scritch grabbed Nadia by the cloak and dragged her away as the warpstone charges began to spit and shriek. She almost struck him, but the first explosion ripped through the engine behind them. Brass rings became shrapnel. Mirrors burst. Chains snapped and whipped through bodies. One sliced a cultist in half at the waist. Another tore through Yorick Red Antler's chest, dragging him screaming into the collapsing machinery. The marauder shaman raised his staff for one last curse, before a slab of black ice dropped from above and crushed him flat, bursting him across the floor in a red fan. The Morrslieb stones screamed. The map in the sky twisted. For a moment, the whole invasion route blazed brighter than noon. Nadia saw every path, every pass, every doom that might yet come. Then, Scritch's final charge detonated beneath the socket. The shard shattered. Green fire punched upward. The canyon convulsed. Faces in the ice screamed and cracked apart. Phantom armies beneath the floor dissolved into mist. The burning map overhead tore into pieces, each line writhing like a severed worm before fading into the night. The canyon began to close. Nadia and Scritch ran. The ledge broke behind them in great snapping chunks. Cultists, Skaven, and marauders fled together, all hatred forgotten beneath the larger terror of the earth swallowing them alive. Some slipped and vanished. Some were crushed flat between closing walls of ice. A Skaven clawed at Nadia's boot as she climbed, and she kicked its teeth down its throat before it fell away. Scritch scrambled ahead, bleeding badly, one arm hanging limp. At the final slope, Nadia's wounded leg gave out. She dropped hard. Pain flashed white. The canyon wall groaned beside her, closing like jaws. Scritch looked back from the rim. Their eyes met. Nadia expected him to run. Instead, he hissed. A curse so foul even the wind seemed to recoil, scrambled back down, and threw a hooked chain around her wrist. "Climb, climb, stupid brave thing." She climbed. He hauled. The ice closed beneath her boots, grinding together, with a sound like teeth chewing bone. She rolled over the rim just as the canyon sealed shut below, taking the last screams with it. Dawn bled across the tundra. Where the canyon had been, there was only snow. No altar, no map, no army beneath the world, no proof. Nadia lay on her back, gasping, staring at a sky now pale and empty of green fire. Scritch crouched several paces away, shaking, blood dripping from his whiskers onto the snow. "The stone?" she asked. "Gone," he said. She looked at him. He looked back with perfect innocence, which on a Skaven's face was more damning than guilt. Nadia did not have the strength to search him. Far to the south, Prague waited, scarred and suspicious and ignorant of how close the future had come to crawling under its walls. Nadia would return with wounds, warnings, and no evidence any sane commander would love. Still, watch posts could be strengthened, patrols could be moved, fires could be kept ready. Scritch turned north, then east, then anywhere that was not beside her. "Arat," Nadia called. He paused. "If that thing whispers again, I will find you." Scritch smiled without turning. "Many try." He vanished into the blowing snow. Only when he was far from Nadia, far from the sealed canyon, far from the dead and the broken machinery, did Scritch Blackneedle stop beneath a leaning stone and open the hilt of his favorite knife. Inside, wrapped in lead and black silk, lay a splinter no larger than a claw. It glowed faintly beneath the fading light of Morrslieb. Scritch stared at it for a long while. "Insurance," he whispered. The splinter pulsed. In its green heart, something showed him a road, and somewhere beneath the snow, something that had not yet invaded Kislev began to remember the way.